In a chamber, two maids conversed about the vast stack of applications received at the estate, among which you were sought by the Duke as a potential bride. However, the women regarded the prospect skeptically, deeming the man as nothing but refuse. Yet it was he who orchestrated a scene at the soirée yesterday, and though mere gossip, it was said that the Duke compelled a drunken baron to kneel when he doubted his lineage, commanding a servant to douse him with dirty water from a mop. As soon as his adjutant passed by, the maids fell silent instantly, while he feigned ignorance and proceeded to the master's study. The assistant brought forth lists of women who responded to his proposal, indicating that numerous families were inclined to barter their daughters. However, the man questioned the merit of seeking a bride through interviews, for nobles would undoubtedly not remain silent over such an occasion, pondering whether sending invitations was necessary at all. Yet the Duke himself harbored no intention of renouncing the endeavor, ordering simply to proceed with the task, as ultimately even this eccentric emperor must be appeased. The heroine found herself utterly perplexed as to her purpose in this wretched carriage, pondering why she was en route to the betrothal with a dubious duke. Since her relocation to this realm, nothing seemed to unfold favorably for her. Anticipating a fresh start to her career after prolonged unemployment, she faced a lamentable fate as the aircraft met a tragic end. When she finally opened her eyes, she beheld Aurora, a character resembling her, albeit with rosy locks. It appeared that those who purported to be her parents were concerned for her, which might imply benevolence. However, yielding to her mother's request, the woman reluctantly consented to betroth herself to the Duke. Geoffrey Ithaca, the protagonist of her latest read, was renowned as an absolute scoundrel. The heroine had yet to acclimate to this tale of transmigration, let alone these nuptials. Hence she presently harbored great discontent, exacerbated by the miserable carriage that only added fuel to the fire. Suddenly, her companion, Angela, her personal attendant, addressed her, asserting that her sighs were distracting, and it would be preferable for her to remain silent. Within the estate, rumors circulated, less than favorable about Angela. The other maids spoke of her as an unsavory individual, suggesting that something was awry. Glancing out of the window, the maid observed their imminent arrival. Aurora, curious, peered outside and was visibly astonished by the colossal mansion, reminiscent of her past life. They were greeted by one of the guards who promptly ushered them inside. Angela shared her impressions as if she had expected a chillier climate down south, yet everything turned out to be not as dire, with a climate resembling their current surroundings. However, the heroine was perturbed by another matter. The host's betrothed had arrived, yet he had not bothered to extend a greeting. This did not bode well, as if he already regarded her with disdain. Suddenly, amidst them, a tearful maiden swiftly passed, trailed by her attendant. Yet she proclaimed that her presence here was involuntary, and she had no intention of remaining. Their escort paid no heed to the maiden, prompting the heroine to inquire herself. She was informed that the girl was a prospective bride, much like Aurora herself. Such revelation proved startling, as the woman herself was unaware of her role in this endeavor. The man assured that she arrived for an interview and found herself merely the 42nd candidate. Seated in the waiting room, the heroine succumbed to despair, unable to fathom the madness that would orchestrate an interview to find a bride. What exacerbated her dismay was the lack of information provided to her. However, the attendant took a more composed stance and noted that the lady seemed genuinely surprised. Thus, preparation for the impending interview was deemed necessary. Aurora found it hard to believe that her personal maid proposed such an idea. Yet it seemed the suggestion was earnest, and she contemplated this union as a splendid opportunity to elevate her status. Subsequently, Angela addressed the heroine, asserting that they were cut from the same cloth, dispelling any worries. At this juncture, the lady indicated the remark as quite brusque, but the maid promptly justified it, claiming it was meant in a positive sense. Ultimately, the heroine concluded that it was worth a try, for she was reluctant to disappoint her mother. Angela wholeheartedly supported this notion. The mother went to great lengths to invest in these betrothals, perhaps unaware that it was merely an interview. She had experience with interviews from her past life, but one of this nature was unprecedented. This novel wasn't categorized as 18+, instilling hope that all would be well. The moment arrived as the adjutant emerged from the chamber, gracefully pronouncing her name. Expressing gratitude for her patience, he introduced himself as Wendell Hamilton. It was now incumbent upon her to trail behind him. The aide led her to the designated chamber, extending an invitation inside, where he proceeded to introduce her to the gentleman. Inquiring if she was the offspring of Baron Audrey, the man, upon receiving confirmation, introduced himself as Geoffrey Ithaca. He expressed delight at her presence in the Ithaca castle. Seated opposite, the Duke asserted that he had perused her letter, which surprised her. The man clarified that it was a missive recently dispatched by her parents, a revelation seemingly unbeknownst to the heroine. However, she feigned awareness, as if she herself desired to dispatch it. The man declared his initial intent to dismiss her immediately after reading, but upon hearing her rebuke, curiously reconsidered. In response to her inquiry about whether he heard everything, the master noted that this castle was situated near borders, often beset by adversaries. Consequently, he had implemented all precautionary measures, with recording devices strategically placed throughout the castle. The woman skeptically inquired whether this influenced his change of heart. Yet unkind thoughts had already begun to form in her mind, deeming him deviant, which might have accounted for his perceived repugnance. Suddenly, he acquiesced, unsettling her slightly. The Duke assured her that he sought a betrothed with a spirited character akin to hers. This proclamation altered her perception of him. He no longer appeared deviant but merely misguided. Wendell apprehensively sought to rectify his master's image, explaining that she might have misconstrued his intentions. In reality, he sought not just any betrothed of age, but an intelligent and courageous one. The Duke, now more earnest, intended to make a peculiar request, that she strike him right away. This unusual plea left her bewildered. Aurora promptly arranged tea and declared that she had not agreed to such terms. She suggested it would be best for her to leave. However, the adjutant swiftly blocked the exit and requested her to wait, promising an explanation. The assistant affirmed that his master had not articulated himself properly, merely desiring to ascertain if she possessed the capability. However, she was more intrigued as to why he would inquire about the bride's capacity for such an act. As if by chance, the aristocrat materialized behind her, causing the woman to recoil. Yet Geoffrey confirmed that she harbored no fear of his gaze, displaying her own fortitude. The aristocrat opted to extend an apology if his question had offended her. Nevertheless, he now sought the opportunity to clarify the situation, and she granted him permission to do so. The sought-after betrothed, in his view, deviated from conventional ideals, and her lineage was known to be rather unique. In this context, Aurora observed that he required one who wouldn't shy away from the scrutiny of others. Yet it was crucial that she not fear his gaze specifically. It was common knowledge that his temperament was less than amiable, and he could be perceived as somewhat aloof. Nobles regarded him as a potential threat that would someday harm them, and even the emperor failed to subdue him. Everyone pursued the Duke, eager to betroth themselves as swiftly as possible. Unfortunately for them, he had different intentions. Nevertheless, he had no intention of enduring further mockery. Hence, he devised a plan. His immediate proposal involved suggesting a contractual agreement, whereby there would be no actual marriage. He planned to release her after a period of 2 years. This meant she had successfully passed the interview. If Aurora accepted the contract, she would need to play the role of his beloved betrothed for the next 2 years, while he would assume the role of a suitor who, enamored, had turned his life upside down. Such a declaration invoked shock and a hint of sympathy. However, the Duke merely requested her not to act as though she were surprised. Yet the question lingered as to why he desired to be struck. The answer, contrary to the initial repulsion the heroine perceived, was not as repugnant. It was done to gauge her reaction and courage. Most people couldn't even meet his gaze. At times, the aristocrat found himself speechless as some, with tears, evaded his inquiries, while others fled without introducing themselves. This indicated their unsuitability for this role. However, Aurora, displaying no such reaction, gazed directly into his eyes. In truth, everything turned out not as dire as the woman had imagined, prompting her to inquire about the reward. The lady therefore inquired about the compensation awaiting her. Upon hearing this, the assistant immediately perked up, as if he had been anticipating this question all along. Wendell began to present a document detailing the reward. It outlined inheritance of the mine, transfer of property rights, and commercial real estate. The adjutant explained in greater detail. Belb mines yielded exquisite colored diamonds, the estate comprised a colossal building in the capital, and the commercial property was situated in a lucrative area. All of this could become hers if she accepted the terms of the contract. This, to put it mildly, intrigued the heroine, and without hesitation, without fully reading the contract, she asked where she could sign. However, the aristocrat decided to disclose one thing before she signed this contract. If she had even the slightest hope that love would blossom, she should refuse right now. This assertion sounded quite amusing. He assured her that there was no chance for love with him, and there was no need to even try. In response, Aurora audaciously redirected the question back to him, asking what would happen if he fell in love with her. For a while, they gazed at each other, causing the heroine to think she might have won. However, with a light smile, the gentleman declared that it wouldn't happen. In that case, a thrill awakened within her, and the woman proposed raising the stakes for the sake of greater interest. Her challenge was accepted. The Duke asserted that if he did indeed fall in love with her, he would become her loyal lapdog, a domestic creature that would come running at her command. This proposal was agreed upon. However, there was a flip side. Thus, he was curious about what benefit he would gain if she were to breach the contract first. He proposed leaving her without all the compensation she could receive, to which the heroine, without much thought, agreed, believing she would never fall in love with him anyway. The heroine, completely exhausted, returned to her maid. The latter, as if oblivious to the recent events, sat and continued to eat, suggesting she thought it should all end sooner. Relaying everything to Angela, the maid pondered, and after a few seconds, uttered that it seemed quiet people were causing problems, and Madame was one who enjoyed making significant mistakes. However, Aurora nonchalantly dismissed this possibility, stating that the Duke was not to her taste, and therefore she would not lose this contract. Nevertheless, the maid still asked if the heroine was sure about this, even after seeing his face, and these words made her reflect. Now she truly began to regret the decision to raise the stakes, for he might be flawed, but he matched her ideal type by 100%, and it wouldn't be easy to turn away from such an opportunity. Nevertheless, the heroine continued to assure that she would fulfill the contract and receive her reward. However, by that time, she was confident she could find a wealthier and more handsome man for herself. Angela, meanwhile, silently evaluated and seemingly reproached her mistress. She noted that the expression on her face raised a question: was she so certain about it? And this turned out to be true. The assistant, in the meantime, welcomed the Duke, and this challenging task of finding a bride was now in the past. However, Wendell was curious if she had at least slightly appealed to him. Without much contemplation, the master denied this, explaining that he was not interested in anything at all. This response greatly pleased the adjutant, and he was glad they found a person who perfectly suited this role. Frankly speaking, half of the candidates were enchanted by his face, and the other half were essentially sold by their families. This seemed to be the case with Aurora, who apparently had no knowledge of the letter written by her parents. But now it no longer mattered, as it was time to conclude this. Now it was necessary to deliver this news to the emperor's palace, and finally they would stop bothering him. 3 days passed, and the heroine had plenty of time to contemplate her actions. Everything looked as if she had hit the jackpot. Compared to this abode, her home chamber was akin to a refuse heap, where even the bath boasted of hot water, and finally she could feel alive. All was well, but that Geoffrey Iddick, since then, never made an appearance, and everything seemed as though he had abandoned her. Suddenly, the woman rose abruptly from the bed and turned to the 2 chambermaids, who observed her with suspicion. She allowed them to inquire if they had any questions. Such spontaneity somewhat disconcerted the maids, but their new mistress assured them that everything would be in order, as she, too, found it tedious at times, so there was no need to be embarrassed. This attitude caused the assistants to relax a bit, but their first question caught the heroine off guard, as they were curious whether it was true that in his radiance there was love at first sight. The servant seemed to burst into a rant, declaring that all this selection was arranged to see her, and he rejected all others. Unable to sleep, he anticipated the day when he could meet her again, and when the man finally found her, they pledged eternal love to each other. The maids heard as if the Duke behaved very gently with her, and everyone in the castle and throughout the country was talking about it. The woman left the room, and before her stood Alphonse, the steward of this castle. After exchanging greetings, the heroine, with restrained resentment, asked him to convey to the Duke that she was here. He did just that, knocking on the master's office. He informed that his bride was here, but there was no response, and this began to get on her nerves. In a few seconds, the doors swung open hastily, and in them was the Duke hastily dressing, inquiring what she needed, after which he suggested talking better in the garden. Out on the street, Aurora addressed him as His Brightness, but the man stated that before she said anything, they should change their address to each other. As his bride, the woman should not address him so formally, and a better option would be to simply call him by his name. He would reciprocate, and this arrangement suited them both. Now, having called him Geoffrey, she asked if he had heard the rumors circulating about their romance. The man affirmed that these were rumors about their affair, and as it turned out, he spread them. This fact somewhat upset his betrothed, but he himself did not understand the reason, as he was not obliged to report on every action. It was just worth imagining that it was like a play in which he was the author and director playing the lead role. Aurora inquired if she played the role of a supporting character, but the man easily denied it, explaining that she was just an extra. In addition, he had already mentioned that they would have to play the roles of lovers, which meant there would be shy situations with inevitable physical contact, and they had already agreed to these conditions. Explaining all this, the Duke inquired why he should inform her about every triviality. The heroine summarized the information provided to her. It seemed that what he truly desired was a submissive figurine who would become his betrothed. However, there was one problem he had not considered, namely that a lady with a character such as hers could not tolerate such a proposition. Such a reaction intrigued the master, and he noted that she was not at all as described in the letter. The fact that he remembered it unsettled her, as she had no inkling about the contents of that letter and what could have been written there. Therefore, she decided to directly state that she had not read the letter sent by her parents. She would like to have a look at it herself, and the Duke had no objections. The letter expressed gratitude for accepting their daughter, emphasizing her beauty. It also suggested that she would obediently follow her husband's wishes, even at night. Such words disgusted her, and she requested him to forget that he had even read it, as she was nowhere near being like that. Addressing the aristocrat, she affirmed her hope that they would show her a modicum of politeness. If anything concerning her arose, she wished to discuss it in a civilized manner. However, Geoffrey didn't understand why he should bother with this, as she might disagree with something. The woman assured him that if it stayed within reason, she was willing to consider it. If not, she would have to decline participation. There was no reason for him to scoff at this request, so he was willing to accept it, but only if she could prove her capability. Later, accompanied by her maid, the heroine arrived at a building in the middle of nowhere. It was a restaurant she somehow had to make profitable. Upon entering, besides surprised employees, she noticed that everything was not as bad as it seemed at first glance. They were also accompanied by Yetica Luna, a guild member. Showing the coat of arms, she declared that they, along with Yetica and the lady beside her, were the Duke's betrothed. The building immediately buzzed with activity, and within seconds the mistress of this place appeared, Oscar, also the personnel manager. The lady ushered them to the finest seats, yet these spots failed to impress the heroine. Consequently, they commenced discussing affairs. In this restaurant, named The Essence of Humanity, they offered a staggering array of 2,576 different human dishes. They were presented with a menu, which in its enormity resembled an entire volume. There were over 1,000 different sets, so they opted for the first two and began awaiting their arrival. Right away, the heroine observed the need to streamline the menu. Luna affirmed that the vast diversity was an advantage of this restaurant. However, Aurora held a different opinion, emphasizing the importance of prioritizing the quality of dishes over quantity. Suddenly, employees approached them, addressing Oscar, maliciously stating they had received peculiar plants again. This implied a need to change suppliers, and out of the corner of her eye, the woman noticed green onions there. Soon their food arrived, and the lady began evaluating the dishes. It looked decent, and the preparation was quite prompt. Now it was time to taste. Each sampled a spoonful, and immediately they almost spat it out. Luna and Angela concluded that it was inedible. Just as 3 individuals hastily entered, demanding food, they turned out to be orcs, greatly surprising the heroine. Luna explained that they were frequent guests. These guests scattered throughout the restaurant, immediately demanding food, making the waitstaff run around quite a bit. Nevertheless, the question remained, why were they in the red zone when the place was full of customers? Thus, they asked Oscar to show the accounting book. Glancing into it, the heroine was stunned. Nothing added up, and the figures were in complete disarray. Aurora began demanding an explanation from the woman, but she merely apologized, claiming they were all inexperienced in this field, making it challenging for them to handle everything. The heroine immediately grasped that falsehoods were being spun around her. It could be unequivocally asserted that the proprietress was quite astute, and it was implausible for her not to handle such a task. However, judging by Luna's current silence, she was also implicated, which in turn meant that it was imperative to witness everything firsthand. Thus, an order was given to escort her to the kitchen. Oscar promptly began arguing that the kitchen was exceedingly untidy and unsafe, and it would be better for a lady of her stature not to enter. However, the heroine's decision was unwavering. Bursting in, she immediately identified herself as the Duke's betrothed and claimed she had come here merely to observe. Therefore, there was no need to pay attention to her, and they should proceed with their tasks. The woman commenced an inspection in the kitchen, and everything appeared quite hygienic. However, numerous product crates were empty. She noticed that a delivery had arrived today, so she inquired about the whereabouts of all the products. Even considering the influx of customers, there shouldn't be so few products. Hence, it was essential to know where everything had gone. However, the employee either did not know or did not wish to disclose, and thus could not provide an answer. Oscar interjected, asserting that it was sufficient, and even if she continued probing, she would find nothing. To the question of whether there was anything to search for, the hostess affirmed that there was nothing of the sort. Suddenly, peculiar sounds emanated from behind the doors, causing the employees to immediately become agitated. When asked if someone was there, individuals began uncertainly denying it. However, the harder he tried to conceal it, the worse he fared. Upon swinging open the doors whence peculiar sounds emanated, Aurora beheld a multitude of people, attired poorly and bearing sizable trays in their hands. At that moment, everything became clear. The reason for their financial losses lay in their act of providing sustenance to the destitute, a fact confirmed by the hostess. This revelation deeply vexed her, as she was convinced that the Duke was aware of all this. Nevertheless, he chose to dispatch her here, evidently hoping for a miraculous resolution. Nonetheless, from the very outset, he had no intention of heeding her. Though truth be told, she was surprised that the Duke engaged in such charitable endeavors. Nonetheless, action was imperative. Oscar apologized for her silence, expressing a desire for the heroine to feign ignorance about the situation. If they didn't assist, those people would simply perish. The woman turned to Luna, inquiring if she was aware of what was transpiring. As it turned out, Luna was well informed. Before they opened this establishment, orcs would assail people and pilfer their food. Hence, they had no alternative but to aid these people in such dire times. However, Aurora wondered why they engaged in this philanthropy clandestinely, utilizing the restaurant as a cover. As it transpired, the Emperor disapproved of charitable projects, and those in power consistently turned a blind eye to their suffering. Luna, with a sense of horror, realized she had divulged too much. Immediately after grasping the problem, Luna began asserting that she was certain they did not wish for this. Nevertheless, it was too late, and yet the heroine harbored no intention of reprimanding them in any way, as it was the truth. Now, with everything clarified, the task at hand was to address the issue, for those people had been starving on the streets since she arrived. Approaching them, the woman straightforwardly inquired if they had come for lunch, and upon receiving confirmation, she commenced distributing food herself. After a moment, she returned indoors and declared that she was unsure why they mistook her for someone else. Still, she was not one to deny the hungry, so it was time to get to work. However, it was also worth noting that she came with a specific purpose, and all she could ask of them was cooperation, as her goal was to generate profits. In order to elucidate the situation, the lady reiterated her firm intent to persist in this charitable endeavor, hence there is no need for apprehension. She also addressed the young lad who worked here, pointing to the vegetables he brought earlier, about which he had complained. However, the waiter deemed them unnecessary, as he did not know their purpose at all. Nevertheless, they explained to him that these could be combined with several ingredients, fried to a crispy texture, resulting in pancakes with seafood and green onions. They commenced the preparation, and the aroma caught the attention of the regular patrons, who demanded to be served this new creation. The waiter assured them that it would be their new menu item. A trial batch was now presented to the orcs for them to assess the dish, and they were absolutely thrilled, wishing for more. Meanwhile, in his chamber, the Duke instructed his aide to summon the tailor. Wendell assumed the master desired a new suit for himself, but it turned out to be needed for his betrothed, who required an entirely new wardrobe. Upon first seeing her, he immediately noticed that the lady had practically brought nothing with her, so something had to be done about it. The aide suggested doing it tomorrow, but the Duke insisted that it be done today. Yet it was impossible as Lady Aurora could not attend the fitting. This came as a surprise to the aristocrat. Wendell reminded him that she was not in the castle, as he sent her to the restaurant several days ago. The Duke did not expect her to still be there, assuming she might have been injured and unable to return. However, the aide informed that she was actually doing well there. The heroine visited the establishment every day, and things were progressing rather favorably. While preparing a new portion, she was pleased that the orcs enjoyed it. Still, she was confident that there were other ingredients in existence, unbeknownst to them, that were edible, so next time they must surely accept everything. Aurora also noted that they could tell the supplier to provide even those goods he didn't know whom to sell to, and then most likely he would offer them at a discount or possibly even for free. Regarding green onions, Oscar explained that they grew wild nearby, and perhaps they could gather some from there. No one had used that land and the Duke owned it. This idea intrigued the heroine, so she ordered people to start collecting, and then they could transform that land into a genuine field. The waitstaff rushed between the kitchen and the hall, orders increasing, and they needed new hands. Hence, Aurora decided to go herself. Entering the hall, the lady approached a table to take an order, but a peculiar orc remarked that he wouldn't mind having a human lady. With restrained displeasure and demonstrative courtesy, the heroine assured him that there was no human lady on their menu, so she asked him to choose something else. Unexpectedly for everyone, the Duke himself entered the hall, wanting to know what was transpiring. The waiter immediately began explaining that all this was thanks to their new manager, Mrs. Z. Aurora. A new dish she concocted had become a hit. This was enough. Now he was curious why his betrothed was in such an eccentric attire, taking orders from an orc, and the employee's life depended on this question. The waiter, alarmed, began to expound that they simply lacked sufficient manpower, and hence the lady was summoned to lend assistance. However, the aristocrat was particularly incensed that she was left alone to contend with the orc, who was already scheming against her, despite her constant refusals and requests to desist. Abruptly turning, she declared that she already had a betrothed, who stood assessing the situation with a discerning gaze. Seating herself with a cup of tea, the heroine commenced elucidating that they were still in the process of transformations, hence had not yet emerged from the deficit. However, judging by the progress, they would soon be in the surplus. To prevent fastidious orcs from growing weary of the dishes, they intended to release something new every month. Nevertheless, they had received favorable feedback about the pancakes, spaghetti soup, and boiled pork. Geoffrey, however, held a different opinion, which he voiced. He asserted that there was no need to go as far as his betrothed, and she shouldn't take it so seriously. Such a statement vexed Aurora, for she exerted efforts to generate profit as requested. Yet now she was being spoken to as if there were an issue. If there was, it would be better to articulate it. If the betrothed insisted, the aristocrat admitted that these results surprised him greatly, prompting contemplation about whom he had truly chosen, the betrothed or the employee. This sounded like a peculiar compliment, and one could partially categorize it as such. However, it was not what the Duke desired from her. In reality, he aimed for Aurora to be less initiative-taking. Such a declaration irked the heroine, but she did not show it. She simply inquired whether she had passed the scrutiny, and if it now allowed her to express her opinion. The aristocrat confirmed it, though in his opinion it was nothing more than luck. If they were done with this, it was time to return to the castle. The lady asked if he wished for them to depart together, and he affirmed. However, he added that they were still engaged, and the fact that the final word rested with him irritated the betrothed. Former employees, smiling cheerfully, assured that she had done well today. This reaction disconcerted Aurora, as it meant they would be spreading new rumors. The heroine asserted that she would return tomorrow, but her man had a different opinion. He immediately contradicted, stating that it was already enough to assess her capabilities. However, she was not inclined to leave this place so easily, as some matters remained unresolved. Luna intervened, explaining that they would send her reports, hence there was no need to visit frequently. Oscar also adhered to this notion. It sufficed for them that she occasionally visited at her discretion. With the instructions they received today, affairs at the restaurant are bound to take an upward trajectory. Upon stepping onto the street, the heroine began surveying her surroundings in search of the carriage in which she arrived. However, as it turned out, the gentleman had sent her back with a maidservant. This raised the question of why Angela had not been seen for a long time. On the way back, Aurora noted that what she witnessed there was a great surprise for her. She couldn't have imagined that her betrothed would be involved in charity work, especially considering his popularity among the laborers. This turned out to be a compliment. The woman was genuinely impressed by how the Duke cared for the people. The aristocrat affirmed that he did it not out of kindness of heart. If racial animosity were to grow, a new war might commence. Thus he managed this threat, and in truth he cared little that the restaurant operated at a loss. With these words he completely shattered the good impression he had recently garnered. Hence the question now was why he had decided to come today at all. Geoffrey remarked that he was simply curious. He was confident that Aurora would prove to be incapable and would simply give up. However, she did not do so. At this moment, anger overwhelmed the heroine, and she inquired if she could strike him once. Her man reminded her that the job interview offer was still valid, and she could certainly try. His gentle smile greatly disconcerted the heroine, and she had to retract her words, attributing it all to being a rhetorical question. The Duke also recalled that he wanted to inform her he would be absent from the castle for some time. Until his return, there was no need to entertain thoughts of leaving his domain. They could talk when he returned. Aurora declared that it seemed as if she were being held hostage, but he did not mind if it was called that. However, the betrothed still asked if it was related to the rise in racial tension. At this question, Geoffrey became grim, explaining after a few seconds that it concerned the guild. Thus, the matter would be left for later, and he had no intention of lingering. 3 weeks passed, and Angela, bringing another report, explained that orcs were going crazy over the new pancakes. They lined up early in the morning, demanding only pancakes. This could mean that those beings loved sweet things, so it was worth adding more desserts to the menu. Several options were already swirling in her mind. While the heroine contemplated new dishes, Angela noted that she heard something on the way here, as if the Duke had returned a long time ago. This news greatly intrigued Aurora. Immediately, she headed to his office with obvious anger. The woman had been confined all this time because of him, but the man did not even think to say anything to her upon his return. In front of his office, the cheerful Wendell was present, who warned that he intended to visit the heroine. However, she simply walked past him, stating that she was going to his boss. At that moment, she began loudly knocking on his door, demanding that he come out to her. However, Wendell immediately stood guard at the passage, fearfully asserting that this should not be done. He was clearly uneasy, and faintly he overheard the conversation between the assistant and the betrothed. She demanded answers as to why she was not allowed in. Suddenly, he forcefully opened the door, reminding her that he had asked not to disturb him. She immediately understood that something was wrong, namely his eyes. In an instant, they reverted to their natural hue, yet she managed to witness them, and such a sudden transformation disconcerted her. Nevertheless, the lady declared that she had come to discuss certain matters, and hoped that the gentleman had not forgotten his promise to listen to her upon his return. Having stepped inside the room, the heroine inquired if he was feeling unwell. However, the Duke boldly asserted that it should not concern her, and though Aurora chose an inopportune day for the meeting, he would still uphold his promise. The spectacles truly suited him, which became an issue. At this moment, Wendell, as instructed, handed the heroine a document outlining her schedule for the future. Starting next week, she would receive lessons in culture and etiquette to prepare for life in high society. Yet one point troubled her, specifically, that the engagement celebration was to take place quite soon, merely in a month. However, she was assured that this would be sufficient. The heroine presumed it would be a small gathering, but the Duke immediately dispelled her misconception, stating that it would be exceedingly extravagant. Hence, he was interested in her opinion. The lady calmly remarked that everything seemed normal, but it was a slightly different reaction than what he anticipated. Geoffrey sensed as if most ladies dreamed of lavish engagements, but apparently she was not among them. Aurora, sighing heavily, explained that it happens when people marry solely for convenience. It mattered little to her, but in her opinion, the more splendid it is, the better. If he cannot comport himself as if he loves her, then people need to be distracted with something. She also noted that this celebration would mark her debut in high society, and the gentleman confirmed it. However, since rumors about them spread quite rapidly, it is essential not to forget to memorize the next page in the document. Yet there she saw a title that sounded like Duke's Passionate Love Project, and it greatly bewildered her. However, the assistant decided it was worth explaining. During a business trip to the East, Duke Itika fell in love with a woman, but upon returning home, he never learned her name. The gentleman could not dispel the beautiful image from his mind, so he decided to arrange an interview, hoping she would find him. Then he experienced a momentous reunion with the woman of his dreams, with whom he plans to spend the rest of his days. Wendell was enthralled by this plan and believed that everyone would undoubtedly believe it, with some even adding their details to the narrative. However, the question now lingered: was the Duke himself confident in his ability to conduct himself as if he were in love? With a wise countenance, he asserted that if happiness could be bought, then surely love could be as well. Nevertheless, she still could not fathom how a man like him could fall in love. It all sounded like a popular cliché, but was the genre so crucial, and shouldn't the reader decide? The Duke also remarked that he was aware the heroine still worked at the restaurant. While reports were undoubtedly good, the gentleman would like to request that she refrain from going there any longer. All this was because it was perilous there. The situation at the border was presently unstable. Though everything had been fine lately, the restaurant was located too close to the border. Jeffrey did not wish to be perceived as a negligent fiancé, and Aurora should understand. After all, she could go elsewhere, provided she had a guard with her. They reached an agreement, and therefore the gentleman asked them to leave the room, as he was quite fatigued. The heroine was not thrilled about the impending lessons awaiting her. She was not even sure if she could handle such a dense schedule, and she truly did not wish to be reprimanded. This word greatly intrigued Angela, and Aurora explained that before coming here she had lessons. If she made any sound while serving a beverage, she was pinched. This occurred every time she made a mistake. Still, she had a stern teacher, and so perhaps everyone learns this way, but the maid affirmed that it was not so. Angela inquired of the lady whether she had indeed lost her memory, and upon confirmation she asked if it could have been due to her family. It was very peculiar because if a younger one fell ill, they were immediately sent to the hospice. However, the lady, not in her right mind, was sold to some duke. It was suspicious, and Angela heard a derogatory term. Nevertheless, the maid, for the first time, heard that children were punished during lessons. The girl uttered that if she were there at that time. The heroine became curious about what might have happened then, to which Angela, with a horrified expression, left that question to her imagination. At that moment, Wendell knocked on the door and informed her that her teacher, Countess Rosman, had arrived at the castle. He thought it would be good for them to get acquainted first, so he came. The woman was already waiting for her in one of the rooms, and as soon as the heroine entered and introduced herself, she immediately felt the piercing gaze. Upon returning to her chamber, she felt that at such a pace she would soon succumb to mortality. The day unfolded with the heroine unable to conceive that it would be entirely consumed by lessons. In the morning there were 3 hours of dance lessons, followed by a 3-hour session of refinement, and in the evening an equally extensive history lesson. It seemed interminable, and now the lady realized the need for a repast to restore her strength somewhat. Timely, Angela approached, perpetually chewing something, and graciously proffered a confection. The maid inquired whether these instructors also subjected her to reprimands, but the heroine portrayed them as exceedingly amiable, deeply impressed by her rapid adaptation. In truth, there was nothing peculiar here, since in her past life she studied as if her life depended on it. It was this diligence that prompted the suggestion to elevate the pace. Angela observed that, similar to her work in the restaurant, the lady could occasionally exhibit remarkable skill. It turned out to be an oddly casual compliment, but Angela, lacking another way, did not know how to express it differently. The time had come to attend the history lesson, which the heroine had absolutely no desire to partake in. Everything appeared normal, yet an intangible sense of something being awry clung to her. Initially, the Countess seemed quite genteel, exuding nobility, tranquility, and elegance. However, this proved fleeting, and her very first inquiry pertained to whether it was dye, as the color of her hair did not seem natural. Subsequently, she posed several rather personal questions, delving into the origin of her hair color and the reason for her delayed education. For 2 days now, she criticized every detail, the manner of speech, a slight slouch during lessons, and the like. Aurora would gladly abandon all of this, but Wendell was enamored with her, and it turned out recruiting this woman was no easy task, hence the necessity to endure her. Now, seated in the study, the heroine pondered over what transgression would draw reprimand this time. However, the matter was swiftly resolved, and the Countess declared at the threshold that they had no intention of greeting her. Disappointment only deepened. Aurora promptly rose, apologizing as she was unaware the teacher had arrived. The teacher reassured the pupil, instructed her to sit, and a glimmer of hope stirred within the heroine that the Countess might be in good spirits today, having let this transgression slide so easily. In a moment Angela entered the room abruptly, bearing a tray for a tea ceremony. The Countess explained that today they would delve into the intricacies of conversational etiquette, with the scenario revolving around their inaugural tea-drinking session. The maid arranged the tray and began awaiting an explanation for the teacher's requisites why she lingered here. However, she assured them that his lordship requested her presence just in case the fare prepared did not meet their approval. Aurora sensed deception. She doubted that the Duke had genuinely made such a request, leaving the question of her presence here lingering unanswered. It was time to commence the lesson, and initially they were to practice tackling uncomfortable queries. As one could observe, the Duke was not indifferent to her. Despite the many hurdles he overcame to bring her here, his feelings were evident, regardless of her lowly status. Nevertheless, the Countess remarked that one should be more cautious, for the hotter the flames of love burn, the faster they extinguish. The heroine, catching the insinuation, inquired if they were hinting that their engagement might be severed. The Countess, with a slight smile, asserted that there was no need to be so distressed over a simple question. It was but a trifle compared to what she would encounter in the future. Nonetheless, this directness betrayed her lack of experience in such society. Aurora admitted that she suffered memory loss due to an unfortunate incident, and this amnesia resulted in the forfeiture of much of her experience. Upon hearing this, the Countess burst into laughter, subsequently noting that it was a convenient excuse, absolving one of any responsibility for their failures. However, the elderly lady also inquired if the Duke was aware of this. The heroine responded in the negative, as they hadn't broached the subject, and she didn't wish to cause him undue concern without reason. The teacher, however, cast a malicious glance at the pupil, falsely smiling as she remarked that it was unwise to keep secrets from one's beloved, and such actions were unbecoming toward one's betrothed. Meanwhile, Wendell concluded his report before the Duke, who expressed hope for any news regarding his fiancée's progress in her lessons. He intended to inquire himself about how her studies were unfolding. Such an inquiry bewildered the assistant. He had not anticipated the gentleman's interest in such matters. Nevertheless, he elucidated that the instructors referred to her as a prodigy and were greatly impressed by her. He added that everyone was content, except for one individual, Lady Rosamond, responsible for matters of culture. She couldn't utter a single commendatory word about her. This signified the need to personally investigate the root of the issue. At that very moment, as if in response to his musings, he was informed that the Countess requested a meeting with him, and permission was granted for her entrance. After exchanging greetings, the elderly lady, with a perturbed countenance, expressed gratitude for being received in such a manner. The Countess, with a demonstrative display of sympathy, noted that it pained her to discuss the matter, but she had nonetheless come to reveal the truth about Miss Aurora. This piqued his interest, but nonetheless the Duke was convinced that it was unlikely for him to be astonished here, and it would be better to spend his time elsewhere. The teacher found it challenging to suppress her tremors. Nevertheless, it was her opportunity to make him indebted to her, so it was imperative to sound genuine, leaving no room for doubt in her words. Not long before that conversation, the Countess received a document indicating that the Duke's betrothed was the daughter of Baron Audrey, the woman shrouded in rumors and secrets, the Duke's betrothed Ithaca. From the very outset, she was pleased to assume this position. Still, no one could have imagined that it would be the daughter of the accursed Camilla. The Countess knew she was in despair, but it was hard to believe that she sent her daughter to the Duke. It remained unclear what had captivated the aristocrat. She needed to witness it herself. Hence, the elderly lady reluctantly agreed. However, upon seeing her pupil, she could not fathom that Audrey could have a daughter like her. Therefore, driven by personal disdain, the Countess promptly declared that the Baron's daughter was, in fact, a commoner. In their family, there was only one daughter, Julia. They dared to mock the great Duke, and the teacher thought it inappropriate to conceal this from him. Hence, she was present. Unexpectedly, the aristocrat observed that it might even be for the better, and one should not forget his origin. Rising through the ranks in battle, the man became a duke, but he himself was once a commoner. This seemed to cause a great stir in her circle. However, if the woman had forgotten about it, it meant it was not so important to her. The Countess panicked and insisted that they had tried to deceive him. This compelled Geoffrey to repeat his words, but louder. He cared little that Aurora was a commoner. There was no need to make him repeat it. Furthermore, they married not due to political circumstances but through love, and this must be acknowledged. Panic overwhelmed the Countess. She could not allow everything to end like this. However, at that moment he was informed that the maid Angela wanted to see him, and she was allowed to enter. As soon as Angela entered, they immediately exchanged glances with the Duchess. After that, the maid pointed at her and frivolously requested her removal. This, of course, angered the Countess, but the Duke himself intervened, stating that he didn't know what the woman expected, but it seemed they no longer needed her assistance. Meanwhile, the heroine studied the information in the book, How to Smile with Grace, a necessary endeavor for the malicious Countess. Aurora was prepared to learn everything written there for one purpose only. Nevertheless, the manner described in the book seemed incredibly strange to her, and she was convinced that it was inefficient to go around like that. Suddenly, her betrothed loomed over her, slightly startling the woman. Therefore, she inquired about his reason for being there. In response, he remarked that he didn't need a reason for a visit. Glancing at her reaction, Geoffrey finally explained that he came to talk because they intended to dismiss her culture and etiquette teacher. Therefore, he came to learn her opinion. Anonymous information surfaced about the Countess, suggesting that she is too ill-tempered to instruct anyone, as he himself overheard her using uncensored language. Aurora immediately realized it was Angela. Nevertheless, there was no need to preserve her anonymity. Nonetheless, this action impressed the woman. Therefore, she sat in the class. It seemed she might appear aloof, but her heart was golden. Geoffrey also noted that he was greatly surprised. He did not expect her to be so patient, especially when it was unnecessary. However, if a similar event occurs, one should not restrain oneself. His betrothed did not appreciate it. Stepping closer, the Duke declared that the woman he fell in love with was not a submissive fool. He became curious about where that fire had gone. Nevertheless, he chose her, and Aurora's reputation would soon become Ithaca's reputation. It is essential to keep this in mind. Before sleep, a dialogue unfolded between the lady and her maid. The heroine affirmed that she knew everything about how she had been defended. Still, she could not believe that the maid was so sincere with the Countess. However, Angela believed it was the best decision. The heroine indicated that she did not wish her to risk everything for her, so such action should not be repeated. However, the maid ignored her request, wishing her a good night's rest. The woman could not fall asleep as their last conversation with the Duke lingered in her mind. It greatly troubled her, and she resisted his charm, assuring herself to remember the reward. Suddenly, she heard peculiar sounds coming from above, prompting the decision to investigate the cause of the noise. The sounds led her directly to Geoffrey's room, and she unconsciously uttered his name. At that very moment, the sound ceased. Suddenly, someone behind her spoke her name, startling her like never before in her life. It was the Knight Campbell, who apologized for it. Afterward, the heroine reported that strange sounds were heard from inside, and she thought something might have happened to the Duke. The knight did not comment on it, and with a cold expression requested her to return to her room. It was the Duke's command that no one should enter his room tonight. In the end, she never managed to lay eyes on the Duke. On the following day, strict orders were issued not to admit visitors, greatly vexing her. Campbell, assigned as her protector, proposed an excursion through the duchy. It presented an opportunity for shopping and exploring local landmarks, an idea embraced with enthusiasm, as she had scarcely been anywhere of the sort before. Aurora, accompanied by Angela, ventured into the streets. The servant was not overly impressed, but the mistress enjoyed it. It was her first time in such a place, and she wondered why she had not done it earlier. However, Angela was primarily intrigued by the nearby food. The women immediately delved into studying local dishes, sampling one after another, and exploring every shop where something delicious could be acquired. Campbell, sighing heavily, kept a watchful eye on them. Suddenly, they spotted a somewhat dilapidated building, and the heroine immediately recalled the restaurant where she had to feed orcs. Convinced that if a building had holes, it meant they cooked deliciously, she entered. Stepping inside, the lady observed that the interior closely resembled their restaurant. However, Angela approached it more skeptically, asserting that this house merely appeared more weathered, and it was unlikely to be intentional. As they went deeper, they noticed not a soul and only a humble table with subpar chairs. At that moment, doubts arose about whether this building was a restaurant at all, as the place seemed abandoned. This greatly disappointed Aurora, indicating that they should leave. Right at that moment, a strangely dressed woman greeted them, assuring she would bring them tea shortly. Meanwhile, the Duke inquired of his assistant about the affairs with Juat. As it turned out, they were displeased with their representative again, and he was executed, signifying that they were not ready for a conversation. There were no updates from the Emperor either, and Geoffrey decided that he was overly indulged. It seemed the man expected to be cared for, but in reality, the aristocrat desired to crack his skull open and see what was happening there. Wendell urgently suggested sending another representative, but received a firm refusal. With words expressing hatred for delays, the Duke affirmed that he would go there himself. However, shortly afterward, the heroine returned to that building with genuine joy, informing Nephthys of her return, along with sweets from a local bakery. Meanwhile, the woman prepared tea for everyone, explaining that these were the finest leaves she could offer them. Thus, they could commence their tea drinking. Aurora immediately felt that she had found her first friend in this world, and was now the possessor of the flavor of life. Nephthys proved to be kind and knowledgeable about many things, making her a good storyteller. The new friend heard about the unpleasant situation with the people of Juat, but the heroine was hearing about them for the first time, prompting her to ask for a more detailed account. It turned out they lived on the edge of the underworld, and an ordinary person could not even see its threshold. However, these people could freely move there, existing on the border between life and death. These beings reminded Aurora of the zombies from her own world, prompting her to inquire cautiously whether they partook in the consumption of fellow humans. However, it turned out to be simpler, as the people of Juat valued symbiosis. They maintained friendly relations with other humans and harbored no desire to annihilate them. Suddenly, another peculiar individual approached them from behind. This person addressed Nephthys, informing her that a guest awaited her in the rear room. Despite her earlier directive not to admit anyone, it was someone to whom refusal was impermissible. The lady rose and apologized for the necessity to interrupt their conversation. She assured them they could continue at another time, and they would soon meet again. Unexpectedly, the Duke arrived, contradicting this statement. He was keenly interested in Nephthys' contemplations. Subsequently, he turned to his betrothed, acknowledging that he comprehended he could speak as he pleased. However, it did not imply engaging with other races. Yet she bore no fault in this matter. From her perspective, the people of Juat appeared very humanoid, a frequent misconception. She was now informed that her new friend belonged to a different race, which greatly shocked the heroine, as she had no inkling of it. With a light smile, Nephthys apologized for this revelation, asserting that she had no intention of deceiving her. Geoffrey, skeptical of every word, insisted she knew when his betrothed entered the building and approached her. He was ready to swear that if she had been harmed in any way, their race would never see the light again. Nephthys dismissed this as foolishness, but added immediately that if he came for negotiations, they should be conducted in favorable conditions. The woman was prepared for dialogue, but under one condition: his betrothed must be a representative. Otherwise, there would be no future between their peoples. The entire discourse seemed strangely familiar to the heroine. Meanwhile, the Duke had no intention of acquiescing to these terms. He declared that engaging in warfare would be preferable. Such a proclamation greatly angered Aurora. She vehemently struck him on the shoulder and inquired sharply if he comprehended what he was presently discussing. The betrothed asserted that there was no need to broach the topic of war at the first opportunity. If necessary, she was prepared to act as a representative. Nephthys remarked that it seemed they both required some time to discuss everything. Hence, she was willing to grant them a few days. However, Geoffrey coldly stated that she should not harbor any hopes, as things would never be as she wished. Upon returning home, a heated conversation ensued between them. The man questioned whether she genuinely believed she could handle another race. The heroine, however, saw no issue in this and failed to comprehend why he reacted so strongly. If it meant avoiding war, she was willing to take the risk. In response, the Duke inquired whether she intended to work to exhaustion, given her already limited sleep. The betrothed mentioned that she could care for her health. In a matter of seconds, she posed a question: how did he know about her sleeping habits? The man noted that it could not be deemed observation. At that moment, Aurora's facial expression turned to disgust, and she ordered him to leave, labeling him a sick pervert. Geoffrey immediately began to justify himself, claiming he hadn't entered her room but merely heard her tossing in bed. However, his explanations were not believed, and he was simply asked not to approach any closer. Nevertheless, he explained that her room was directly beneath his, and he possessed exceptional hearing. If necessary, he could provide proof. The man asked her to look out the window while he stood here. Immediately, he began recounting that the maids were currently gathering apples, proving to be accurate. Subsequently, the gardener noticed them and promptly chased them away, signifying that plucking the apples was forbidden. The Duke elucidated this by emphasizing his exceptional auditory acuity. As previously mentioned, he possessed a superb sense of hearing and simply couldn't remain oblivious to the occurrences in his surroundings. Hence, he discovered the woman's insomnia. Ultimately, Aurora retracted her harsh words and offered her apologies. Nevertheless, the aristocrat was just relieved that this misunderstanding had concluded. Returning to the topic, he asserted that the heroine could not be a representative for Juet unless she fervently desired to become their dinner. Such a statement shocked the woman, but the Duke remarked that Nephthys should have informed her about the dietary habits of her people. However, she only indicated as if they had symbiotic relations, but in reality they simply preferred their prey not to perish. For this very reason, Juet maintained an amicable disposition toward humans. If the situation was now clear, it was time to discard this idea. To his surprise, Aurora had no intention of retracting her words. She insisted that he could not conduct negotiations without her, so she needed to be given a chance. The Duke took the request seriously and questioned if she had only learned about them today. He asked if she could promise that the matter would be pursued to completion. Naturally, she couldn't guarantee anything. Nevertheless, she understood its necessity and pledged to approach it with utmost seriousness. One could not stand aside when war was unfolding. Even if the aristocrat thought that his betrothed couldn't handle it, she still wished for just one chance. Alternatively, they could go there together to hear their conditions. He reluctantly agreed, but with a stern expression, he stated that it would be better not to change one's mind. In reality, she did this because she remembered the opening passage of the novel, which mentioned, Duke Ithaca, hero of the Empire, died in the Fourth World War. She had only read a partial portion, up to the plane crash, but she vividly recalled that everything began there immediately after the Duke's death, narrating the demise of humanity. He perished due to betrayal. Negotiations turned into a bloody massacre with no mention of his betrothed. It was now clear that if she didn't intervene, the Duke would die, and then humanity would fall, culminating in her own demise. Hence, she needed to intervene, even knowing the risks.